In MedTech, we're in the business of caring for patients.
Flashy features and collateral to woo customers and investors. There's all of this like AI hype and egregious like AI washing.
If it doesn't move outcomes, it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
And so you could talk all the AI fluff you want, but if you're not moving outcomes, no one really cares.
Yeah. If you've got AI in your name right now, you should probably figure out a way to do a little bit of a rebrand there.
Again, going back to first principles, how do you resource your organization? How do you think about innovation? How do you think about product development in the market? How do you think about revenue growth?
Healthcare is kind of simultaneously one of the most innovative industries, in MedTech, but it's also like one of the most resistant to change.
Finding common ways to access and push data across different care settings. I think this is going to be a win-win for everyone.
Because I feel like you could build the best solution in the world, but if you don't know how to get it in front of the right people.
Like access to physicians, access to like pilot deployments, access to sales forces is extremely expensive.
The good healthcare tech talent especially is being drawn to like higher paying tech roles at traditional tech companies.
It's crazy in MedTech how much people actually want to give back, both in terms of talent development and in terms of just like building the ecosystem.
LLMs and AI it is becoming commoditized. The cost per token, cost to compute, right? Just dropping every day. And
open source versus closed source.
Yeah.
It has been proven that open source wins in the long term, right?
Yeah.
To the point where Meta and others are now open sourcing because they realize,
Hey everyone, welcome to the MedTech Innovation Podcast. It's your host, Spencer Jones, founder at MedTech. If you've listened to any episodes, you know that I'm absolutely obsessed with AI and robotics and how they intersect in MedTech. So if you're like me, this episode today is going to be a special treat, and I know you're absolutely going to love it. So I got to sit down with Santosh Iyer. Santosh is an accomplished entrepreneur and leader with a proven track record of pioneering deep tech solutions in medical devices and digital health. He's currently the founder and CEO at Moonshot. In this episode, we cover tech talent, why it's moving to traditional tech and it's not staying in MedTech, how MedTech isn't competing for the tech talent, the venture capital system that is kind of broken. We talk about AI disruption, where it's going to come from, and then how kind of AI, LLM enabled companies, bootstrapped small guys, have opportunities to really build powerful solutions and get traction without having to go through the venture capital route. So regardless of where you are on the stage, spectrum, etc., you're going to love this episode. So let's go ahead and jump into the pod. Santosh, welcome to the pod. Where do we find you today?
Yeah, good to meet you, Spencer. Good to see you. I'm based in Boston, Massachusetts, here in my home office.
Awesome. So for those that don't know, you founded Moonshot, I think back in 2023, right? Mm-hmm. Which, by the way, I absolutely love you guys' branding. It's like so clean and it's like a lot of similarities to the MedTech branding. But for those of the people that don't know, tell us about Moonshot, how it was born, and what's the mission, vision for the company?
Yeah, Moonshot is really focused on training the modern healthcare workforce. We really want them to be tech-enabled and lean into some of the future-facing technologies involving AI, advanced imaging, and robotics. It was founded from a personal experience of mine getting into the surgical robotics space, got interested in high school, back in the early 2000s. And so it was a pretty nascent field back then. And I was able to create a hands-on learning experience for myself to get interested into the space. And that's sort of how Moonshot was born, is that experiential hands-on learning really drove enthusiasm and skills retention. And so we've taken that learning pedagogy and then applied it to all Moonshot programming for student and adult learners.
Yeah, so student and adult learners, I'm assuming we're not talking elementary school, maybe we are, but like high school, college, and then like kind of where does that top out on like the other people that Moonshot serves?
It does not top out. I mean, we go to early career, mid-career executives as well. And so this is really for all learners who are interested and passionate about MedTech, healthcare, and the life sciences.
So AI literacy, in my view, is like really bad right now in MedTech specifically. It feels like you can talk to some of the smartest people out there in MedTech. And when you're talking to them about AI, it feels like you're like talking to your grandparents about TikTok. I wouldn't even say naivete. It just feels like they're just like, they don't know, they don't care, they don't see the applications for them. But like, do you see AI breaking through at some point? And I know there are technologies that are like pushing the edges with like imaging and certain things like that. But like from kind of a ubiquitous, integration, implementation, or just kind of in the zeitgeist where people in medtech are like actively using it like they are in design and tech. Like, do you see that breaking through at all, and like when?
Yeah, so I do see it breaking through, but unsurprisingly, the answer is probably not going to be for those sexy use cases. I do see it hitting a tipping point in the next couple of years. I think it's going to be a lot for the back office operations around manufacturing, logistics, supply chain, kind of internal product development. But I do see a lot of companies starting to adopt that pretty much immediately. And I think fortunately, ChatGPT has kind of opened Pandora's box and also kind of made it acceptable to play around with these technologies.
Yeah.
So I do see us hitting that kind of transition point, if not already, soon.
Yeah, no, and I think like the policies of these large companies have like a lot to do with it. My wife's mom, she works for like a financial services company and she does marketing. And I was like, oh, like, have you messed around with like Claude or ChatGPT? Because it's like pretty great at some of this stuff. And she was like, no, I haven't, which wasn't surprising. She's late 40s, early 50s. But when I tried, I was like, yeah, let's pull it up. I'll show you. And her work computer, it had it like blocked. And it was like, you can't access Claude, you can't access ChatGPT. And it blew my mind that if, financial services is like a little bit different, with financial data and all that stuff. But like, even like the blue chip, I get if you want to block DeepSeek, but like blocking ChatGPT to me was like, why would you do this to yourself? Like, you're kind of like limiting the bandwidth of your own people. Have you seen any of that where it's like, from a corporate perspective, some of the larger medtech companies that are actively kind of blocking access to these tools?
Yes, they are. And I think it's any other enterprise. They don't know what they don't understand. And so I think IT is often really worried about security, data leaks, trading with proprietary company data.
Yeah.
And so, I think this is one of those things where I think they're going to figure it out because there's enough use cases now in the enterprise level where people have made it work and work with the company data in a closed environment. And so I think that's probably going to be the way forward. I will say that a lot of the employees outside of company laptops are playing around with these tools and they're hungry to use it. And whether companies like to admit it or not, I mean, people are using this already.
Yeah.
They're just maybe not reporting it, but people are using this to get an edge in their work. If you're not, you're kind of behind. So
yeah, no, and I see countless opportunities to like integrate it into the workflows. I mean, quality management to me is a dead giveaway as like something that needs like very rule based, very procedure and sequence based. Like AI is great at that stuff. So there's just like a million opportunities there. So when Moonshot works with partners, clients, etc., high school is kind of one element, but I think like a larger element's around the workforce, right? So like workforce development. And I know a lot of the times that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, that kind of lands on with the companies themselves, like these, large companies, but is also like facilitated or supported by state economic development organizations. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I will say that, we also specifically also help startups because they don't really have access to a lot of these training resources and they're usually hungry for kind of top talent. And so usually when you can't compensate these people, unless they're part of the founding team or, part of the early employees, it's really hard to pull that talent. We also serve a lot of startups as well to kind of give them kind of level the playing field.
Yeah, that's awesome. The whole like, hey, there's a skills gap and the training's not there. That's like near and dear to my heart. That's the whole reason we started Exo MedTech is because we just saw like, and again, it's not like AI, robotics and imaging skills, but it was just the skills and the training around kind of like all the other stuff, right? Going from 0 to 1, 0 to 2. So when you're engaging these companies, talk me through like what it looks like. Is it a week-long thing? Is it a month-long thing? Is it a day-long workshop? Can it take different forms? I'm curious.
Yeah. So right now we've been very narrow with our focus on AI education. It's specifically focused on imaging and it's one day. The reason is the following. People are busy. They have families, they have their lives, they have their work. There are a countless number of these AI and probably ChatGPT courses online now for free. And all of us can do them right now. But why don't we do that? Because we don't have the time. We don't have the patience. And more importantly, we want to contextualize it to our jobs. And so my philosophy has been to be very narrow and focused and to be high impact in a short amount of time. So that's why I specifically focus on imaging because it's a little different from the ChatGPT variety, which by the way, you can play with right now for free. Imaging is a little bit more complicated. It's something that we intuitively understand as humans. We are the best vision perception systems that we know of, right? So we actually intuitively understand how to build vision-based AI because we know the ground truth. But a lot of us don't have the tools like ChatGPT to build those models. And so I'm really focused on the computer vision AI lane. And then I make it one day team-based and hands-on because that's where the fun and the retention comes in. I feel like learning should not be boring. And unfortunately, our education system is broken where they make it feel like a drag. Like, oh, I got to get a degree. Oh, I got to do all these tests. It's like, no, like learning is fun. It's intuitive. We
Yeah.
all learn on the job. I mean, we're actually always learning. And so my goal is just to lean in on that and then make it an experience that people can take back to their businesses.
Absolute preach, man. Like we think about this the same way. 2-hour webinars that are kind of like just floating in the ether that people can access. Like to me, like that's just like no one wants to learn like that. We were talking to kind of an innovation incubator space. I won't name by name, but like they were like, yeah, well, we purchased, it was like 5 figures from this company and it's supposed to be like training. And it was like, yeah, it's a bunch of like 1.5 to 2-hour webinars. He was like, how's that been going? And he's like, well, no one's really using it. And I'm like, yeah, no one, like people's attention span is like this long. And if you don't like ring fence their time and say like, focus on this and make it fun and digestible, right? Like they're not going to do it. Like they're not going to do it or they're not going to retain it. They're going to have it on and they're going to be doing something in the background. So like, I totally agree. Like the other thing you said that stuck out there is like contextualizing the application of AI, right? Because just saying like, hey, here's how you build a hero page of a website, like that's cool, but like that's not teaching you the principles that you're going to need to apply to your like MedTech job, kind of build that MedTech skill set around it. So talk to me about AI. I think everybody has a good picture of that, imaging and robotics. So when you say imaging, just like dig deeper on that. Like what are some of kind of the initial applications where you're saying, hey, we're going in and talking about image recognition, image processing models to do X, Y, and Z, like those MedTech applications, just to set the stage for people?
Yeah, so imaging is anything you can capture with the camera. So that's medical imaging like MRI, CT, ultrasound. It's observational imaging, so stuff that you can see people doing things with. So things on the manufacturing floor, things in the hospital operating room, things in the ICU. That is imaging, right? So it's anything that a camera or a sensor can capture that produces a 2D image that you can see with your eyes. Mm-hmm. So that's a very broad definition because as you're probably kind of already sensing, that has many different applications beyond just like the ultra real-time clinical use case, which is what we focus on in the workshop because it's cool. But practically speaking, a lot of that framework and learning can be broadly applied to a variety of other use cases, often more for the back office, I would say, than the front office, right? And so that's how I think about imaging.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and it's really a blend too, because like if you're documenting like large batches of PDFs that were maybe scanned or faxed, like that's image processing. You know what I mean? If you're, watching a workflow in sterile processing and having this like image detection system of like, were things cleaned appropriately for the right amount of time in the right way? You see what I'm saying? Based on the instruments, et cetera. Like that's also image processing, right? Video processing is image processing at its core too. At least that's how I think about it, right? Series of images. So no, that's awesome. So I want to get into like some like different topics. Of course, we've in and out back into Moonshot and stuff like that. But I know you believe this, right? That like flashy features and collateral to woo customers and investors, there's all of this like AI hype. And, I think like it doesn't always convert to sales. So I'm just curious, like, do you have any examples of like egregious like AI washing that companies have done? And like, what tips would you give to investors when they're trying to separate like genuine innovation from like catnip for venture capital?
So I think the easy giveaway is the word AI or machine learning or LLM or something of that variety is part of the product feature or the title of the business.
Yeah.
It's the equivalent of saying in 2000, I'm an internet company.
Yeah.
We laugh at that now, but that's actually legitimately how people raise money, right?
Yeah.
It was like take whatever core product you're doing and then add internet company to it. And then suddenly your valuation boosts. So
yeah.
I think that's a big red flag because AI is a tool. It's not the product or feature. And I think oftentimes people get confused. Like I think in tech specifically, people are obsessed with AI. And tech is very much showcasing the tool itself. The tool is the product in tech. But in MedTech or in other industries, like that is not the case. Like people don't buy AI. They're buying a solution to a problem, right? And so I think the real value with businesses that are actually using this correctly is they have a core product or feature that's not AI focused, but that's solving a very niche or very like a high pain point. And then AI is being integrated in a very seamless way to address that pain point, almost to the point where the user doesn't even know it's AI. I think that's the best case scenario, right? Because you want to separate out the cool flashiness from like solving real problems. And you'll see a lot of the AI use cases are probably at this point solving a lot of unsexy problems. And I think
Yeah.
that actually makes sense because the businesses that are actually able to see ROI are using it for a lot of unsexy things. The people that are using it for sexy things at this point are probably using it as a marketing piece or as a way to raise money. And that's going to be frothy, right? Because eventually people, like if everyone has access to that, then what's your real differentiator?
Yeah.
Then you actually need to go back to solving a core pain point and something that's actually valuable to your users and customers, right?
Yeah.
And so I think we're kind of going through this hype cycle where the people who are actually using it in their businesses are not tooting their horns about it. I mean, you're going to see the output of that in the next couple of years.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, like, I feel like my Twitter feed is like all tech and design. And then like I come over to LinkedIn and it's just like a whole different world with like the MedTech LinkedIn. But no, I totally agree. I think especially in a market like I would say like MedTech and hospitals and health systems for sure, where like AI may be a signal of like risk or it's too progressive for them to implement in their system. But you see what I'm saying? It's almost like you don't lead with it. Maybe you barely mention it, right? And they shouldn't feel like they're ever interacting with AI. It should be completely like frictionless and like native to the workflows that they do. They just feel like it's magic, right? They don't like feel like you're not beating them over the head with that like AI messaging. I think that's super important, like for MedTech and like companies that have AI as part of their stuff to listen to, like what you just said. Like don't make it the centerpiece, make it a core part. And you can speak to investors about it in detail. But like if you've got AI in your name right now, you should probably figure out a way to do a little bit of a rebrand there.
Yeah. And I just want to give credit to, I just had a conversation with Bruce Ramshaw yesterday from Care Syntax. You know, they're going through this rebranding and he made a very salient point, which is exactly as you said. We're in MedTech, we're in the business of caring for patients, right? So ultimately, any product should in some way impact outcomes. Yeah. And I know no one likes to do the work, but the reality is if it doesn't move outcomes, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you could talk all the AI fluff you want, but if you're not moving outcomes, no one really cares.
Yeah.
Like literally no one in the ecosystem should care unless you're moving outcomes. That like the value is created in improving outcomes, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's a great North Star. And I know it's obvious, but I think that's a great North Star also for AI. It cannot be the focus the focus needs to be on how are you improving outcomes. And those products and services are almost always not going to be AI directly. Because it's tied to patient care.
Yeah. No, and I do see, I'm curious what you think about this. One of the difficult things if you have a digital solution of any type implementing in a health system is that like they are used to like the epic, massive NetSuite type like ecosystems. And I've found, you know, at least in the people that I've talked to and companies I've talked to, more hesitant to implement point solutions because they're like, well, how does this talk to my other stuff? How does this speak to my other stuff? I'm sure you've been seeing a lot of the stuff on MCP, this model context protocol, which basically allows your application, right, to speak to other applications without the necessity of building a custom API every time you want to do it. And so I think there's a huge opportunity for like these kind of like point solutions to have a much easier integration by utilizing MCPs and to go into a health system with a lot of different crap they're going to have to integrate with. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I know MCP, it's like, is this hype? Is it another hype cycle with MCP or is this like here to stay?
I'm not too familiar with MCP specifically, but I have other analogs to MCP, you know, pre-AI. So like Redox, for example, streamlines the API to read and write from the EHRs, right? Philips now has purchased Capsule is essentially a physical interface to read and write serial data from like all these devices in the ICU and OR. And so there are analogs to MCP that have already existed in which hospitals have begged for companies to integrate to, specifically because it makes IT's headache go away. It helps companies basically write to a single interface and they're done. Yeah. Right. And it also streamlines distribution because like once you go to major health systems and they've integrated to these platforms, it makes deployment seamless. I think a lot of the costs honestly get tied up in deployment. Yeah. And I think a lot of these digital native companies, I think they maybe underestimate the cost of solutioning and deployment at these health systems. So yes, I think broadly, I think an MCP type approach or identifying the vendors who are playing at the MCP level, I think is crucial to rolling out.
Yeah, 100%. So I want to talk about kind of healthcare talent. You know, I know you think the good healthcare tech talent especially is being drawn to like higher paying tech roles at traditional tech companies. Do you think, you know, healthcare is fundamentally undervaluing technical talent? Are we going to reach a breaking point where like healthcare organizations just can't compete with big tech salaries or kind of like where does this end? Where does this resolve?
Yeah, so I think we've already hit that breaking point, honestly. I think maybe the only exception to the rule are probably wealthy tech founders or people who have done well in tech that choose to selectively enter into healthcare.
Yeah.
That's the only exception to this rule that I'm seeing, and they're part of the founding team. But for the most part, otherwise, you're kind of seeing this brain drain of top talent going to other industries where the pay is higher. And so how do you continue to innovate for patients, for physicians, for society? I think we're in a unique point where things like AI are becoming commoditized.
Yeah.
So the cool part is that before, to be able to do those breakthrough AI solutions in healthcare, you needed to hire the top person from DeepMind. You needed to hire the top person from NVIDIA. But the good news is a lot of these companies are investing in platform and infrastructure that serves healthcare. Now it's about how do we leverage those platforms effectively and contextualize it to the use case. So that does not mean you have to be the top data scientist. What it means is you need to know how to use those technologies and platforms and be able to effectively contextualize it for the healthcare business. And I think that sort of really boils down to two different categories. One is cost, so time for development. Like you need to sort of throw away this old notion of, MedTech product development timelines and costs, because frankly, with things like ChatGPT and others, development times are rapidly accelerating. Engineering is starting to get commoditized. And then on the revenue side, again, because costs are low, and if you understand the use cases really well, and you can embed it to products and services that are selling, the pull-through or upcharging opportunity is also commensurately high. So I think people who can understand both sides of that equation extremely well stand to hugely gain in this era.
LLMs and AI it is becoming commoditized. The cost per token, cost to compute, right? Just dropping every day. And there's like a lot of different options that are either free or open source that are kind of popping up and all these different things. I definitely see as well, like thinking outside of like the megalith healthcare system and hospital, but like all of these different, whether it's home care, whether it's primary care, outpatient, like all of these different healthcare settings where like the majority of healthcare actually takes place. 40%'s right in the hospital. The rest of it's like in other places. I absolutely see the ability for companies to come in and solve real acute problems for those businesses, right? With AI solutions. And like, it can be, an AI wrapper, you know what I mean? Or it can be something like really more advanced. And I think one of the coolest things to me too is like, you can come in and with the AI tools today, offer a service-like offering with software margins, whether it's workflow automations or different things. And like you said, the cost to upstart and develop that and the timeline is so small now that like a handful of people that maybe one of them is very technical, but the others are slightly technical with a combination of like Cursor, Windsurf, ChatGPT, right? And Framer and some other things, Supabase can spin up and deploy something that could like absolutely solve a number of problems for a primary care practice. And they're like, this is going to save us $5K a month. We'll pay you $3K. And they didn't have to go get venture money to do it, right? And so they've got a small team. They're not on the rat race hamster wheel.
Yep.
And they're just building this like really cool, nice business and owning basically all of it.
Exactly. And I will add another point, especially for the bigger companies that are looking to move in this space for like those software, like high margin services. Your biggest advantage here is your data. It's not the AI. And so I don't think a lot of people appreciate that fully, right? And so if you're presumably sitting on some sort of proprietary data from your sensors, your hardware, or even your network, like monetize that, right?
Yeah.
The cost to monetize, as you have just basically said, is very low. So I would say even for large organizations, the upside is huge. And I totally get the reputational and the regulatory side of things, but a lot of these wraparound services do not have to be necessarily clinical decision-making oriented. There's a lot of other services that you can do to build up the customer base and the ecosystem, which I think can really allow you to kind of test these solutions before you broadly integrate it to your organization.
Yeah. One thing that I like realized the other day, so like working for Combo Spine, and it's an orthopedic spine platform, right? We sell hardware, right, that they use, et cetera. But like, I was thinking to myself, I was like, how hard would it be to like spin up a little surgical planning app that we had that could like go with it? Maybe it plugs into kind of the EHR, extracts some imaging, and then puts together that is, and I, prototype it in Vercel V0 and like got it up there. And it was like, yeah, this could be like something that we just added as like a, hey, you want surgical planning app with our thing? This is free. You buy our hardware. Like, but those like little bolt-ons of like, we don't even sell software, but it's so easy to kind of like quick and easy to develop this, and even like bespoke solutions that we can like offer this as like sweeteners, right? Or kind of like trim other value elements out on the margins as well. And I think you've spoken on this before, but like an innovation paradox in healthcare, where healthcare is kind of simultaneously one of the most innovative industries, in MedTech, but it's also like one of the most resistant to change, right? Over the next, we'll say 5 to 10 years, where in your mind does the largest disruptive potential live? Is it established players with resources that are getting doing better internally innovating than they are currently, which I would argue is not great? Or do you think it kind of continues to be from like the nimble startups, or just kind of where do you see the biggest disruptive potential?
So I wish it was the bigger players because I think it would be good for the ecosystem.
Yes.
But I think they are their own worst enemies. I think there's a lot of processes, red tape, other priorities that compete with innovation. So I would say it's startups, but I have to qualify that by saying it is not the startup that is following the traditional venture model and looking to exit to a strategic. And that's what every MedTech startup believes. Problem with this is the multiples are low, the financing is high, the timelines are long. That is not the type of company that's going to create these returns. It's going to be the ones similar to what you mentioned, which are smaller, more nimble. You know, you've heard the word seed strap, which is essentially raising a small amount of money and then moving to profitability. Like, it's those kind of businesses that leverage, you know, as you mentioned, MCPs, the ability to leverage distribution and interfaces that are already existing in health systems to demonstrate product market fit, and then they become inevitable. And I think when you're inevitable, people are forced to act, right? And I think that's very much possible, right? Like, hospitals in a weird way are very open to partnering with small companies if they see the broader potential, especially platform startup companies that they can roll across their IDNs, right? Because they're hungry for innovation, and guess what? The strategics are not serving that up to them.
Yeah.
So hospitals want that for their patients. Strategics are not necessarily prioritizing that. And so I think there is an opportunity to solve, but I think you need to do it in the right and thoughtful way.
Yeah, no, totally agree. Venture capital, I feel like in MedTech is like just such a necessary evil in a lot of ways, but it's a market that I wish there would be some like disruption in, because I feel like, I don't know, the venture and the M&A market has just been like so not great if you're a MedTech company, and it's like not really serving these MedTech startups, but it's like some of them, there's just really no other option. But I think for a lot of people, hopefully they kind of will continue to explore other options like that. But to that point though, like you were talking about building solutions and then becoming inevitable, et cetera. I feel like for a number of different reasons, it is more difficult to market solutions in healthcare and in medtech than it is like marketing them in like a B2B SaaS tech world, or design world, or direct to consumer and all that stuff. Like the purchasing contracts are one big roadblock. You could go down the list, right? Like the user is not the buyer, is not the stakeholder, you know what I'm saying? It's just kind of a convoluted. So I feel like, yes, the people that are building these solutions and building them in the right way, but I also think like the people that can like really figure out how to effectively market is like another huge kind of like, you know, unfair advantage. And they can use AI to help them do that, right? And they can use data, like you said. Quick plug to Alpha Sophia, like intelligent data platform. Understanding your ideal customer profile is tough in and of itself, but even once you get there, how do you identify the specific surgeons and physicians that are going to be the most likely to buy, purchase, fight for your device based on what they're doing in their own practice? What I use is Alpha Sophia. I've been using it for over 2 years. It's an incredible intelligent data platform. They have Medicare, Medicaid, and commercial payer data, so you can see CPT, DRG volumes for all the procedures they're doing, trends over time. You can see where they're practicing, different site locations of care. You can even see where they went to school, open payments data. The physician profiles are gorgeous, and it really helps you translate your understanding of your ideal customer profile into better targeted sales list, better funnels for your sales team to go out and execute on, so they're not just spraying and praying. I can't tell you enough how it's changed, you know, our approach in sales and marketing to just hoping for the best to really working through a defined high value target list that's going to be game changers for our business when we win that business. So if you're scaling a business, if you're just a startup, there's plans that Alpha Sophia has that can fit your budget. If you're interested at all in leveling up your sales funnel, leveling up your sales and marketing team, go to alphasophia.com and check them out today. You could build the best solution in the world, but if you don't know how to get it in front of the right people, Sandy that runs procurement at the surgery center here, like how do you reach that person, right? That's barely active on LinkedIn, and you know what I mean? It's just difficult.
So one of the things I've started to see work, especially with these digital solutions that depend on hardware or infrastructure level distribution from like some of the incumbents, right? The number one thing in MedTech that does move fast is sales. Okay. Innovation may not move fast, but sales moves extremely fast, and it is the bottom line, right? So you focus on the highest velocity part of any strategic, which is sales. And typically the non-number one is the hungriest in a certain market segment. So it's all psychology at the end of the day, right? It's all psychology. So what I've seen work is if you go to a number two player in any segment and you partner with them to help them push their product and close deals, they will do anything to make sure that your solution is getting in front of as many eyes as possible. So in healthcare, unfortunately, you're right. They don't get their information from LinkedIn, right? They trust these GPOs. They trust their department heads. They trust the finance people or they trust these incumbents that have been there for years. And so I think brand and trust really matter. And unfortunately, as a small startup, you don't have that. And so this is where I think partnering with the right person, ideally who's not number one in a category, is where I think you stand to gain the most. The sales leaders in any of these organizations, I feel, are very open to innovation, are very open to closing deals, move at breakthrough speed. It's often the rest of the organization that often slows them down. But I think that's great because those are the people you want advocating for you, both to the M&A side as well as the hospital customer side, right? So that might be a little bit of a silver lining here, especially for startups that are looking to enter the space.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of surgeons and physicians that are absolutely not on LinkedIn. They have no social media, whatever. But then I know there's a growing contingent of surgeons and physicians that are getting information from LinkedIn. But even still, you can market to them and reach them. But like at the end of the day, they can bring it to people, but bringing it to the person that's actually making the financial decision or somehow reaching them or the people on that value analysis committee that aren't the physician or the surgeon, if you can do that and get brand exposure with them before they see it brought in from the surgeon or the physician, it's huge, right? It's like, it's massive because you've built that trust, right? You've built the trust, like you were saying, in the presence.
Exactly. And you, as a startup, you have to do this constantly omni-channel. Like there is no excuse. That's almost a prerequisite. What I'm discussing is assuming that's been done. Assuming there's awareness. Now it's pretty much a matter of sealing the deal. Like if the surgeon or the physician doesn't see value, there's no sales rep that can push a product that they don't believe in. So that has to be established. There has to be value already. Now it's a matter of leveraging sales velocity to close deals and get you in to as many places as possible.
Yep, for sure. So you're a proponent of kind of first principles thinking in healthcare. So if you were appointed the healthcare czar tomorrow with unlimited authority, what are 3 fundamental health system changes that you would make to like completely reimagine, from first principles?
Yeah, so I don't know all 3, but I can start with the first 2. One is interoperability, and then like breaking sort of this stronghold on distribution and sales from the incumbents, right? So we already kind of touched on interoperability with the MCPs, but finding common ways to access and push data across different care settings, I think this is going to be a win-win for everyone, particularly also ensuring that patients are part of that mix, because unfortunately right now, patients are disintermediated from the healthcare experience. A lot of them choose to get care based on data that they're capturing on themselves and that they're kind of capturing from the internet, right? So I think giving some of that, bringing the patient in, ensuring that there's data interoperability. Second, breaking the distribution sales paradigm, like rather than relying on your, big GPO contracts, rather than relying on these incumbents, who've been trustworthy and who have been selling to you for, 20, 30 years, democratizing that access a little bit. There's the app store concept in other industries like, in tech, there are 5-star reviews. You do not need to rely on your personal experience to make a purchasing decision. You can crowdsource that, right?
Yeah.
So this has already been proven in other spaces.
Yeah.
And I think the third would be the ability for companies to innovate in sandboxes. Places like Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic do this, but I think I will caveat it by saying you need to provide a more favorable equity, like a more favorable like incubation environment. Like you cannot be aggressive on equity or dilution, but you need to be able to figure out a way for them to build their technology, serve the needs of your patients and physicians, and then, leverage that in your health system, right? But then that also allows these companies to rapidly innovate and solve for the unmet need in a way that is probably cheaper than raising expensive venture money. Like access to physicians, access to like pilot deployments, access to sales forces is extremely expensive. And so hospitals are, I think, uniquely positioned to take all that away and do things in a very cost-effective way for these startups, right? So if they really believe in innovation, I think that's where they need to start. But I think the key is they cannot think like a venture capitalist and think, I'm going to own everything that comes through here, because then startups are not going to be incentivized to work with you, right? Because you're not different from the venture capitalist or the incumbent that's trying to put unfavorable terms in front of you. So I think hospitals have a huge opportunity to provide those, innovation sandboxes.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, and something I think the largest and the best that are doing it, like the Cleveland clinics, the Mayo clinics, like they've got big innovation departments that are like staffed to do this. And I think there are lots of other, like we would consider large health systems where they may be agreeing with that idea, but they just are not staffing people to help execute and implement the sandbox and managing that flow of problems and user needs and like deploying deployment and evaluation of, the deployment, pilots, et cetera. I think a lot of places would agree with you, and they're like, we have 3 people.
So Spencer, I will say this though. So you've heard of MedTech Innovator. They've had over 1,500 companies, and all the judges work on a volunteer basis. Why is it that there's such an interest in supporting innovation in the private ecosystem, but not in the hospital side? Like, I guarantee you, in any geography, you would probably be able to find the top, 10 MedTech people that would be willing to sit in some sort of external advisory steering committee to support a local hospital's need to support innovation in that region. Like for example, where you're based, I'm sure you would be a great fit to help them understand, like, how do we think about these technologies in your health system, right? It's actually a win-win for you as an advisor, the companies, and the hospital, right? Now, obviously, putting the financials aside, you already have the talent. It's not a lack of talent or people, and you don't have to do everything from within, right? Again, I think there's this archaic notion that we have to hire from within. We have to have them full-time, on salary, on staff. The way the economy is transitioning, that's no longer feasible. Like, everyone's basically, either an employee, they're doing consulting, they're doing fractional work, they're starting their own business. Like, it's a whole gamut of professionals these days. You got to tap into all of them.
I think that's a great point. Like, it's not a talent in this respect. It's not that the talent doesn't exist. I mean, like, regionally, geographically, or whatever. It is just kind of a brain power and time allocation. And I think the point you made is so good about hospitals are just like, I couldn't tell you the last time where it was like, oh yeah, I do contract work for this hospital that wasn't like a part of like an anesthesia thing, or, you know what I'm saying? Like, people in that kind of like innovation biz dev where it's like, oh, doing contract. I feel like what I've seen is like, they'll want to do these big projects with organizations that may be like 6 months or something like that. But those like small, almost like indie hacker engagements where it's like, hey, we're going to work with you, whether it's small contract or like even maybe volunteer to like get some stuff done for us. If they leaned into that, there would be so much opportunity for them to get so much good talent, like brain dumping and helping their organization.
And by the way, like, all the people on the judging advisory side want to give back in some capacity. It's crazy in MedTech how much people actually want to give back, both in terms of talent development and in terms of just like building the ecosystem. Like, it's crazy how much hunger there is for people to do this. They just don't have the right opportunities to do it. Because I think people forget there's a networking aspect to this as well. If you find other like minds, why are you a judge in MedTech Innovator? Yes, it's about seeing the companies, but it's also about connecting with those other judges, right? So I don't think everything is financial at the end of the day. I think there are a lot of other motivators for people who want to support that ecosystem.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I'm judging the Heartland Challenge, right? Which is a startup competition thing. I've been an advisor, a judge for like hackathons with like Arkansas Children's. Like, if there's an opportunity, I'm like jumping on it, and like not getting paid for any of this stuff, but that's not the point. Like you said, like, and there's other judges there. Like, it's not right. They have no shortage of people that are like willing to help out with this stuff. So it's a really good point. So kind of leaning in, talking about the skills gap, all this stuff. So, your work at Moonshot, trying to address big skills gaps within kind of emerging technologies in medtech. Are the larger medical device companies, receptive and seeing the value of this type of kind of like internal workforce development? And like, I would say similar to that, like, are the state economic development groups, how are they thinking about this? Are they pushing harder than the large medtech companies? Are they like how do those two things play together?
Yes, I think the state economic agencies are extremely excited. They believe that this is a sector of so every single state I have gone to has certain provisions for where the economic development funds are allocated, and almost every single one of them has healthcare, MedTech, life sciences as a vertical. So that tells you there's a need, okay? So number one. Number two, for a lot of these companies, they have shown interest, specifically the ones who are not investing in these spaces, but feel FOMO. I mean, they know that it's a matter of time before they're going to get obsolete, right?
Yeah.
And so those businesses are actually the ones that are most receptive. And they're also very cognizant of the fact that a lot of the top talent in these spaces are probably not coming to them. They're either going to their competitors or they're going outside of healthcare completely, right?
Yeah.
So there's a talent gap and there's a skills gap, right? And so, yes, I'm engaging with a lot of those folks who are essentially, like I said, the number 2 or number 3 in the category that are not playing in this space, but they know that they have to.
Yeah.
Because it's an inevitability, and this is how disruption works, right? At least they've acknowledged that there's disruption happening. A lot of them don't acknowledge that. And so we're able to work with their teams to get ahead of it. And I will say that it's not specifically just an R&D focus. We are also focused on executives, sales and marketing, business development, and clinical, because this is a 360-degree cultural shift on understanding the value of these technologies. It's not something that just R&D pushes. And fortunately, with the accessibility of these tools, I mean, I don't think there's an excuse for anyone to learn it. Like, you don't have to be an engineer or data scientist. It's the equivalent of saying, I need to be an engineer to use the internet. Like,
yeah.
that
Yeah.
like my 4-year-old daughter can use the internet, right? So
Yeah.
that's not an excuse anymore, at least with the way things stand now. So.
Yeah, no, for sure. How would you like grade the FDA's handling of kind of AI and robotic technologies coming in? Like from a regulatory perspective, are they A plus, C minus? Like, what are your thoughts?
I would definitely not say A plus. I think between B and C, I think there's a lot of other folks who have personally dealt with those submissions that can speak better than me. I will say again, I think it's an education issue. I think these guys are literally building the plane as they fly it because they don't know what they don't know. And because they're a regulatory agency, they will probably tend to be more on the cautious side.
Yeah.
But that comes at an expense, which is stifling innovation, right? So again, I think going back to my point about hospitals and getting external advisors, there's a lot of people hungry to help people like the FDA understand what the value of AI is, what the risks are, what the opportunities are. I think it's a matter of leaning in on these experts and crowdsourcing that input versus just being insular and being closed. Because we've seen this battle play out, by the way, with model development, open source versus closed source.
Yeah.
It has been proven that open source wins in the long term, right?
Yeah.
To the point where Meta and others are now open sourcing because they realize, oh, wait a second, relying on the ecosystem makes better models. Well, why can't that be true with information?
Yeah.
Why can't that be true with talent and assessment, right? So I think this is where organizations like the FDA have an opportunity to evolve and get the right experts who are right at the forefront to be able to really provide a true opinion versus just closing everything off and then being protective, right? We've seen how this plays out in other markets.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, like, and thinking about like ISO standards and then being updated every 4 or 5 years or whatever it is, and I'm sure it's different for different ISO standards. I feel like the velocity that things are moving with like large language models, capabilities, applications are moving so fast that it has to be almost like a quarterly or monthly like guidance update, right? And experts have to be driving that because if you're only doing something every 6 months at this point, you are so far behind, you know what I mean? In terms of like what the latest stuff is. And I think too, like once these endpoint applications have the ability to then implement new models and kind of new models, new protocols like that are coming out, and like that startup time is low, but if you've got an endpoint solution that's in place and there's some capability or feature or model that comes out, you can implement it in that same quick speed, weeks, right? Like there has to be a regulatory framework and kind of guidance environment driven by the experts that like helps that happen, because like we can't afford to not have that happen, right? Like we can't be like, oh, we're going to wait 2 years after any model or, you know, MCP type thing comes to the fore before we like allow it to get implemented. It simply can't happen, right? Like we're going to lose the arms race. Capital is going to suffer and go elsewhere. I think you're spot on.
Yeah. And I will say, you know, we've heard with these, the notion of working groups, right? Virtual working groups and the ability to synthesize information from meetings is already a thing with LLMs. Like that's trivial. So you could imagine a scenario where there's no limit, or maybe there's some like loose vetting on who actually contributes information. If there was a way for these working groups and some common topic to meet in some frequent basis to exchange information on the latest and greatest, we already know things like AI can synthesize the key salient points. And you could imagine like someone at the FDA then saying, okay, like this is the consensus across this sector of MedTech. This like in cardiology, like this is the consensus, right? It's group-based. It's really democratic, I would say, in the purest form, because you're getting that kind of diversity of opinion, and then they're able to integrate that into their decision-making. So it's not a lack of tools. I think it's just the processes that are currently there today are not suited for this, right? So that's what I'm saying. Like, I think if they change the processes, I think they'd get much more, almost, I would say, quasi real-time information to make the safest and most best decision for the patients.
Well, no, I totally agree. And I feel like you've got to fight fire with fire here. Like you were talking about meeting synthesis using AI. In my head, while you were talking through that, I was picturing kind of a version of this. So I saw this diagram, and this person had built like a trader, but it was like an agentic trader where you had, you know, kind of input, and then it would go through like the Warren Buffett agent, right? And the Kathy, whatever agent, and all these different trading agents, and then like a risk agent, and then an allocation agent, all of these different agents that are giving different inputs. That feeds into kind of like a decision-making switchboard operator agent, and then they have a buy, sell, hold, whatever. You could imagine that where it's part of it is like expert opinion from these meetings, part of it's meta-analysis of clinically available data, part of it is post-market surveillance from existing solutions, and all of these kind of different agents are synthesizing all of that information and then bringing it to a context that that can be reviewed and discussed intelligently in a meeting with humans in the loop, and then they're making decisions off of that, right? But I think all of that depends on you using AI to help guide and regulate AI. And I don't know that they're doing that right now. I hope they will soon. They're not.
Yeah. This is where I think leaning on industry or even tech, for example, to help set up those pipelines and workflows is only going to help them, right? And by the way, there's a good chance that someone's probably going to create some new technology where it doesn't fit into the existing work stream. Great, spawn a new work stream, right? And you probably pull in people from the field that are also interested in contributing to that. I mean, I sort of think of it like a Wikipedia or like a GitHub or something where people can start to put in information in a work stream purely for informational reasons and like for education and awareness. I think this is a win-win for everybody involved. Like right now with surgical robotics, I mean, things have moved so far from where they used to be, right? For people who are no longer in the space or were in the space, it's really hard to keep track of where things are unless you're actively there, right? But imagine like, the ability to kind of tap in a workstream and say, okay, like this is where things are. This is the latest and greatest. Rather than relying on like documentation or archaic information or like, these regulatory experts that have worked at these companies, like this is a very outdated way. Yeah. And a very like information is asymmetric.
Yes.
And you don't want gatekeepers here. You want information to be freely available, transparent to everyone, because I think that again makes everyone win. So
yeah, 100%. Okay, we're getting close to time here. So you've worked with Fortune 500 companies. You've also worked with like high school students, right? And like every generation, it's funny. I saw a news clipping and it was like this is from like 1860, 1890, like 1920, and like every generation has that moment where they're like, these kids don't want to work. These kids are lazy. These kids are stupid or whatever, right? And like I think a lot of people say that about Gen Z or whatever, but I am sure that you have seen that there are some of the most like cracked, dialed, talented 16, 17-year-olds that just like mind-blowing. Some of them building like businesses doing, crazy numbers. But what surprising lessons have you learned from, high school students that taught you about kind of innovation or anything else that, you think seasoned healthcare executives could learn from?
Yeah, so I think your point about the high school students that are very hungry, I think is sailing. You probably heard of Anand Sarwal's Formidable Fellowship. It essentially gives $1,000 checks for students that are basically crushing it from a business perspective, entrepreneurship perspective, sort of like the Peter Thiel, fellowship. So that's already happening. I would say specifically in healthcare, the propensity to like learn AI, like the hunger to learn and master AI to get ahead is crazy, to the point where, I mean, we have kids that will literally sit in front of building that model, tuning that model for hours. And man, because they have the tools now, right? It's not like you have to sit behind some terminal and like figure out how to, no, like these are like point and click tools. So these kids are obsessed with mastery in a way that I don't think any traditional educational system or course would ever see. And that's because they see value. So I think the key is like hunger is sort of commensurate to the value these people see. They realize like this is the modern economy. And so they need to master these tools to succeed in the modern economy, right? Before it may have been becoming a TikTok influencer or basketball person. No, but like this is actually different. In healthcare, we actually see these kids saying, okay, if I use these tools, I can do my job more effectively. I can start businesses. I can make money in a non-dilutive way. At zero marginal cost. And I think what that teaches for executives is to like basically get out of the kind of cognitive entrenchment where you have been used to seeing businesses done a certain way for the last 30 years. I think we've hit an inflection point where you basically have to throw your assumptions out and almost start fresh. Again, going back to first principles. How do you resource your organization? How do you think about innovation? How do you think about product development in the market? How do you think about revenue growth? By the way, Moonshot itself is a bootstrap business. I intentionally did this because I think the venture system is broken. I would have loved to have raised money. I choose not to because I don't think it's actually serving the ecosystem correctly right now. It needs to kind of go through a reboot a little bit. So I think if a lot of executives had that mindset, you would improve margins, you would improve velocity of innovation, you would improve sales, you would improve agility in the organization. But I think, unfortunately, either they're going to do it or it's going to be forced on them by other upstarts that are like, it's going to happen. It's not a matter of if, right? And so I just want to make them aware so that they know what's coming in front of them versus being surprised, right? And this has happened historically. This is a very this is not new. This has been happening, every revolution, right?
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah.
Santosh, this was incredible. Like, honestly, we're going to have to do this again at some point because
absolutely.
I feel like there was like so many like, paths and avenues and stuff that we could have gone down, but we'll put, your LinkedIn, Moonshot links, all of that stuff in the show notes. But like kind of last word here, I'll let you have the floor. Anything you want to plug, anything you want to kind of alert people to, anything like that, floor is yours.
Yeah. So I think for me, the people who I see who are really learning, innovating, and building are actually, in my opinion, not the ones in startups or large companies. It's people sort of outside, I would say, that are really able to play on their own and tinker on their own. The reason I say this is because a lot of them are not necessarily tied to, venture priorities, investor priorities, customer priorities in the same way that businesses are. And I'll say personally for me, right, like over the last 18 months, my focus on the technical aspects of AI have been possible because I've been able to step out and really look at the ecosystem overall. So I will say for those who are actually looking to build, like truly learn and build, I think you got to do it on your own a little bit.
Yeah.
It's going to be very hard to expect that to happen within a company per se. I mean, certainly I'm going to try to help you through these upskilling opportunities, but I think you need to seek those opportunities yourself, and create those learning opportunities for yourself, because the company's not going to prioritize it for you.
No, that's great. Like that intellectual curiosity has to burn from within. You know what I mean? And you've got to lean into it. So, okay. Well, everybody, I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, because this was like so stimulating and intriguing to me. But Santosh, thank you again for being on the pod. And for everybody that stayed on this long, thank you for tuning into the podcast. Until I see you next time, take care.
Thanks, Spencer. Appreciate it.